The classic Euro platformer is known for many things, having to collect everything in sight, lethal drops of water, endless leaps of faith. These are just the basic tenets. But what is often more interesting than the games themselves are the often strange ways in which they were advertised.
We know all about the cross-promotion, of course. James Pond loved to pick up a penguin, Zool's affection for Chupa Chups went so far as to have one included in the game's box, and Super Frog was powered by Lucozade, which was actually originally going to be Newcastle Brown Ale, until someone sensibly realised that bottles of booze probably weren't the best fit for a kid's platformer.
But there is one other Euro platformer that went a different route for their advertising, and in doing so, they might just have topped them all. 'Cause, well, none of these other legends tried to mingle in the world of politics, did they? Well, Alfred Chicken did. And as a result, well, we can't not bring this story back from the archives.
Let's have a little look at Alfred Chicken first. Mindscape's game from 1993 is probably in around about the middle of the table when it comes to 90s Euro platformers, replete with their animal mascots that may or may not have been inspired by a certain spiky blue hedgehog. Certainly not on the level of James Pond or Zool, but not exactly terrible either. Unlike a lot of his contemporaries, he didn't actually get his start on the Amiga. Instead, the first Alfred Chicken came out on the Game Boy, with two separate revisions for both regular Game Boy and Super Game Boy, although the latter only came out in Japan. For developers Twilight, the Chicken was their most major game to date. The small British studio had previously mostly worked on microcomputer arcade ports for the likes of Ocean, as well as a couple of high-tech's endless micro Hanna-Barbera cartoon tie-ins. For Mindscape, this was simply them throwing their own hat into the ring. Everyone else has their animal mascot now, so here's ours. At the time, the studio were somewhat prolific on Nintendo systems, releasing a decent number of pretty rubbish games in the NES's Twilight period. So it makes sense that Alfred Chicken would spend most of his life on Nintendo systems, quickly travelling from the Game Boy to the NES in 1993. It's most certainly damning with faint praise to say that Alfred Chicken is one of Mindscape's best Nintendo games when you consider the likes of The Terminator and Captain Planet, but it is perfectly fine. Our clucking great hero has a few neat abilities, including dive bombing onto opponents and massacring them with his razor-sharp beak, and the gameplay is absolutely fine. Is it somewhat generic? Well, yeah, but it doesn't necessarily try to rip off Sonic too much or anything like that. What Alfred Chicken gives you isn't a whole lot, but it is 11 or so levels of perfectly fine Euro platforming, with all the collection and all the tile-based graphics and game design that you could want. Perfectly serviceable, and in ordinary circumstances probably not a game that would be particularly remembered for any reason. Whether it's Game Boy, NES or indeed Amiga, you'll have a thoroughly okay time here and nothing more. But Al Chicken would be famous for much more than just his game, at least for 15 minutes or so.
Mindscape's marketing saw them hire a young fellow by the name of Carl Fitzhugh as the product manager for the game's advertising drive. Now, while Alfred Chicken was very much hyped and advertised in the UK games magazines, just as you would expect it to be, it doesn't seem like Mindscape had too much of a budget for publicity stunts that were outside of the norm. But what they did have was an Alfred Chicken suit for Carl to get into.
And so he did. Carl could be found in his trusty suit at the 1993 European Computer Trade Show. He tried to get everywhere, bless him, competing with other bitter rivals dressed as the likes of Bubsy the Bobcat, Captain America and Pierre Le Chef. And hey, he even got on camera. There he is, a little bit of B-roll filmed for a totally unrelated BBC programme starring the Codemasters folk. His next appearance on camera would be far more memorable, however. We cut now to the quaint and perfectly English surroundings of Christchurch in Dorset. It's May 1993, and it is my sad duty to report that the sitting Conservative MP, Robert Adley, has rather suddenly popped his clogs. Naturally, the death of an MP leaves a seat empty in the House of Commons, which just isn't the done thing, and so there's going to be a by-election to fill it up again in July.
Said by-election will actually generate more publicity and attention than you would think. It's seen as something of a test for the ruling Conservatives and their John Major-led government. There will be TV cameras, a live broadcast, a man with the surname Dimbleby hosting it, and everything. And as it happens, a by-election like this is the perfect chance to do a little bit of sneaky marketing.
A £500 deposit is all it takes to join the political process, after all. Just that and a couple of signatures, and presto, Your name's on the ballot for all to see, and you're even guaranteed literal seconds of television time on election night, as well as some old codger known as the returning officer saying your name out loud for all to hear. Mindscape's budget most certainly could stretch that far, couldn't it? And so, on the 29th of July 1993, Neil Fitzhugh would get on the stage in Christchurch and stand for Parliament dressed in the trusty Alfred Chicken costume. When grilled on his policies, Alfred was apparently quite coy, but did say that video games should be mandatory during House of Commons proceedings.
Now, of course, he was not the only one with the idea to do something silly at a by-election. What with all the media attention and so on, people running in by-elections to promote something, or for some quite strange cause, or just for the sheer crack, was something of a tradition. 14 separate candidates would compete in this by-election. Obviously you had the candidates from the major three parties, Labour, Liberal Democrat and the much-fancied Conservatives. This had been their seat for a while after all, and it was thought to be safe as houses for them. Then you had the more serious independents and the fringe parties, and then after that you had the silly lot.
The silly lot, of course, was led by the monster-raving Loony Party and screaming Lord Such. The most experienced of all campaigners, a man who stood in every election he damn well could, replete in ridiculous demented Pearly Kin-style costume. Monster Raving Loony was essentially the main anti-politician protest vote. If all the major candidates on the paper filled you with vomiting disgust, then you may as well vote for Such and friends instead of simply defacing your ballot. Alongside Lord Such and the Alfred Chicken Party lies a veritable smorgasbord of British culture. A man named Peter Newman dressed in an England football team shirt for the Sack Graham Taylor Party, clearly unhappy with the national side's recent dire performances. Glamour model Tara Bardo Jackson dressed in, well, not much at all for the By the Daily Sport Party. There's another guy who wanted a man named Ian to be made kin, another one who was there to promote a local pub called the Highlander, and a candidate for the Rainbow Alliance, who were kind of like the Monster Raving Loony Party, only somehow even sillier. One of the great joys of by-elections, especially back then, is that every single one of these candidates would be on stage all at once. The serious candidates and the silly ones all lined up next to each other, and all would have their name and total votes read out.
So, I'm sure you're dying to know just how Alfred Chicken did. Well, out of the over 50,000 votes cast in the contest, Neil Fitzhugh and the Alfred Chicken Party amassed the grand total of 18. Now obviously this was far away from the amount required to keep the deposit, and so £500 was lost. Not that it mattered. £500 to get on national television in such an event? Absolute bloody bargain, mate!
And helped along even further by this election becoming an even bigger story thanks to a massive upset. The Lib Dems utterly trounced the Tories in one of British politics' biggest ever by-election swings, thus guaranteeing plenty more chat about the by-election in the days to come. And one of the best lines in the fallout came from the journalist Philip Goldenberg, who said, "Christchurch was the place where the difference between the Tories and the Alfred Chicken Party was that members of the Alfred Chicken Party ran around with their heads still on." Perfect! Thank you very much. But the funniest thing of all, perhaps, was that the Alfred Chicken Party didn't even come last. They beat the Rainbow Alliance candidate by 2 votes. Alfred was more than happy to have a little jig around after not coming last, as well as congratulating the other people on the stage. He even shook the hand of the winning candidate, Diana Maddock of the Lib Dems. Isn't British politics fun?
The reaction to Alfred Chicken's political campaign, it has to be said, was pretty bloody good. It generated newspaper column inches for sure, especially in the tabloids, as well as a big chunk of coverage in games magazines.
See You Amiga even saw fit to name it their top publicity stunt of 1993, and it's hard to disagree with that. It was everything that Mindscape could have hoped for, quite honestly. It even had more of a lasting impact beyond 1993 when the Lib Dems, years later, cited the likes of the Alfred Chicken Party and the By the Daily Sport Party as a reason for greatly increasing the number of signatures required for someone to get on a ballot, in a "you're no bloody fun anymore" style attempt to stop people using the political hustings for commercial gain or any other frivolous reasons. As for the chicken himself, he made another charge at the computer press in early 1994 on the release of the Super Nintendo version of the game, naturally titled Super Alfred Chicken. You could dial up a 08 number and hear the voice of the chicken himself advertising the game. Just make sure that you get your parents' permission first, kids. Mind you, it has to be said that any parent who gave permission for their kids to do such a thing probably needs their head examined, and their bank account. And if you're curious about what the Alfred Chicken phone line sounded like, well, someone actually made a recording of it. And here it is, thanks to the SoundCloud channel Cringe Audio. Let's listen, shall we?
This is Alfred Chicken, Super Alfred Chicken. Thanks for calling, and I'm coming really soon. Really soon. Like the end of March, I'll be in every toy store, every department store, every cool place where they sell Nintendo games. And I work best on Super Nintendo and also on Nintendo and Game Boy. I'm really cool. I'm way cool. Every magazine's talking about me. If you don't have me, you aren't cool. So get me now. March 23rd, you can find me. Alfred, help me find my girlfriend. Help me find the watering cans. That's a clue, kids. The watering cans. And look out for the mousies. Bye.
I think we can all agree that a full 60 seconds of someone half-assedly putting on a stupid voice that presumably is an attempt to sound like a chicken is well worth the cost of the call to a premium rate phone line alone, can't we? Super Alfred Chicken is, as it goes, probably the best game of the lot. While it's not officially a sequel, it does revamp the levels quite a bit, and as such, it's the closest you're going to get to one. Anything else to report? There is, weirdly enough, a PS1 remake of the original that came out back in 2002. You can now play Alfred Chicken with 3D graphics. And yeah, it's not good. The art style is really quite ugly, and Lord knows what they did to the poor character. The decision to replace the original soundtrack with what I can only describe as slow funk porno groove is also not exactly an inspired one, it has to be said. This, needless to say, is the worst way to play the original. There's also a Game Boy Color revamped port of sorts in 2000 called Alfred's Adventure, but, well, that was pretty much it for the chicken. He only really had the one major game, and that was that. He was done.
Alfred has an odd place in history, I suppose. Even if he didn't make all that much of a mark in games, it can be fairly argued that he made much more of a mark in British politics. Like, I don't even have to clickbait that or anything, do I? Because he was even cited years later as a reason for why stunts like his shouldn't be allowed to happen again, long after most gamers had probably forgotten he'd ever even existed. And so, in a weird way, this humdrum chicken stands alone in the annals of the history of this great island nation, preserved on committee papers and in election results in the halls and archives of Parliament for all eternity. Probably anyway. Anyway, bye for now.
Thanks so much for watching. Now, if you liked this video then, please do like it, leave some cool comments, have a look at my social media, my Twitter mainly is where I am, have a look at my Twitch because I'm live most every day, and if you really like what you see, have a look at my Patreon. You could join this list of very awesome people here. Alexa Jones-Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, Arcade.y Webmaster, Brian Henniger, Chris, Conrad Pritchard, D. Zalior Rimwan Sutter, Dagorath Dungeon Keeper, Danny Wolfers, Dave Cork, David Rose, Dinty76538, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Glunfeth, J.S. Manchild, James Brown, Jace Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Kid Cassette, Lucas Kaligovsky, Matthias Granzo, Mike Clayton Travis, Martin Pataki, Nate Milbank, Potter Margel, Ren Bimon, Robert DeFelice, Wad B, Rusty Kelly, Seth A. Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stuart Christopher Brownlee, Tariq Amir, Tim Wald, Tom Kay, Yerka Operator, and to all the rest of the glorious community, thank you so much, and goodbye.